This video is brought to you in part by the patrons of the Lazy Eyebrow, and from the comments and watch time from viewers like you. Thank you!
Alright, here's the 411. Say some gangsters dissing your CombinerWars fly armor. You just give them one of these.
Why hello YouTube, greetings from the Lazy Eyebrow to the diet review that turned into a full review because I did not know when to stop animating. This is the review for Siege Ultra Magnus. This is also the retrospective review for CombinerWars Ultra Magnus, with the added benefit of the review of Cubian Biao's Core Fighters 33013, which is just a knockoff of Perfect Effects Core Magnus figure. This is a mouthful of figures covered here, and this isn't even all of it, so let's get into it by starting with Siege Magnus. Siege Ultra Magnus is a fairly decent attempt at taking the white Prime with trailer armor that we all know and love and giving him an alien look while still resembling something of a vehicle. As an added bonus to this, however, he's somewhat of an homage to the RID 2001 Ultra Magnus, strictly speaking on just the vehicle mode, and you know what? I kinda see it. Like, you scrap the red from the top of the trailer and it looks a lot like it. Just superficially, of course, as looks kinda like it is where it ends, as it seems to omit one of G1 and Robots in Disguise Ultra Magnus' defining features, that being a functioning car carrier. Aside from that omission, however, I'm not opposed to this design at all. Like, for all intents and purposes, it's a truck with a blue and red trailer, but in this context, it's a big honkin' thing on wheels, with all sorts of mechanical bits that at first glance just kinda remind me of bridge trusses slapped onto the side of a trailer. For it being supposedly an alien design, though, it looks pretty good at distinguishing itself as fairly well removed from an Earth aesthetic, while still retaining some semblance of a pre-Earth tractor trailer. Like, you get your cab with its Gatling gun fog lights out in front, that in general looks retro-futuristic in its cab-over design, and again, fans of the RID 2001 show will pick up on its aesthetic blended into the design. The general appearance of all the bits of blue metal going everywhere lend to the idea of an alien trailer, and the random bits of the robot hanging out inside the trailer are a little unsightly, but it's alien, so that's its excuse. All the red comes together on top to cap off the trailer quite nicely, and can sort of fit two cars on top if you want to force the trailer to be something it's really not trying to be. On the back, you get the iconic white trailer doors, the red inset. One thing I really don't like, however, about this design are the very obvious feet at the back. They're permanently angled like this for the sake of wheel clearance on robot mode, and here it looks really ugly. However, again, you can absolutely use the alien excuse, and that kind of be the end of it if you don't want to think too hard about it. So all of this came together to make a fairly decent Cybertronian Ultra Magnus. I would have preferred had this been closer to the fictional car carrier, but I know a few people were happy with the RID homage, and I personally was at peace with it existing. I didn't want it for myself, as I was happy with the stock CombinerWars one, but a friend was looking to offload his, and I said sure, if nothing more than curiosity about what was going on here. In addition to the hundreds of comments I was getting saying they couldn't believe I was deliberately choosing to skip the mold, piquing my curiosity. And you know what? Solid attempt at alien tractor trailer. I don't hate it, but it's certainly not my favorite either. But then they had to go ahead and force this thing into an Earth mode. So, yeah. This is Kingdom Ultra Magnus, on loan to me from a friend, and thank goodness for that. This is another one of those examples of Hasbro executives insisting that figures be converted from molds that were really not intended to be the thing they wanted it to be to save a quick buck on the design phase. Which is a total shame because if I recall correctly, there actually was a plan to have this be an extensive project overhaul to be compatible with the Earthrise Prime mold recolored into white. But the budget stopped the designers from doing what they actually wanted to do, and then it was quietly cancelled. And what we're left with is this ugly truck thing that's pretending to be in Earth mode, and it does so miserably that I'm genuinely left wondering why there's such high praise for this figure. Like, strictly on its own merit as an Earth vehicle, I feel it's awful. Tooling was changed to have the trailer sit slightly further back, making all the truck junk very plainly visible in the full package mode, and it just looks ugly with the arms and hands hanging out back here. While essentially the same trailer, the sides were updated to reference the original car carrier, but that's kinda where it ends. A reference. It's still not a car carrier, but if you squint hard enough and step back 30 feet, you can see the towers of the original seeping through. Other than that tiny difference to the sides, the new tooling for the wheels and the way things store inside the trailer, it's the exact same toy. Siege Magnus is to Siege Sideswipe as Kingdom Magnus is to Kingdom Sideswipe, except the difference here is that between the two examples, Siege Sideswipe was basically already working as an Earth mode. Siege Magnus, however, did not. Like, it's even the same right down to the really ugly looking feet hanging out on their 20-degree angles at the back of the trailer, and all of this with a trailer that is physically impossible to pivot on the bed of the truck. Like, we call Rodimus the Space Winnebago, and yet Siege Magnus, and now by association Kingdom Magnus, feels more like a luxury motorhome than Rodimus ever did, which I kind of find funny. This, however, now brings us to our third figure. This is CombinerWars Ultra Magnus in the stock configuration. Nowadays, this figure seems to get dunked on continuously by a good number in my comment section at least, especially since Siege Ultra Magnus debuted. I genuinely don't get the newfound hate for this figure, especially considering how much praise it got 6 years ago, and now all of a sudden, it's junk. Sure, the CombinerWars version of Magnus isn't trying to be purely G1, as the intent was a design that felt like a cross between IDW's Ultra Magnus, as piloted by Minimus Ambus, and the G1 take, which makes sense considering it originally came with an Ambus to fit inside the cab. So understandably, some were a little turned off by it not being a true G1 take, especially compared to other recent offerings. Some criticized that for the price, you're only getting the Ultra Magnus, and not a Core Prime. Well, thankfully, Perfect Effect came out with a replacement to help with that last complaint. And then when that sold out, Kubi and Bao started making knockoffs of them so you can still get your hands on a Magnus cab. So this is Core Magnus. It is a G1 inspired cab that helps update the vehicle mode to be a little more G1 while still integrating itself into the transformation. I mean, it does more than this, but we'll get there. So now that we have the upgrade out of the way, let's get to comparing. So the first thing you may notice about the CombinerWars trailer is that it's actually a car-carrying trailer, and as such also has the ability to pivot on its hitch. Those two facts alone are why I prefer this version of the character in toy form. Like, yeah, the cab's a little smaller, but the trailer just looks awesome. And is even something I went on about in my initial review for the figure back in 2016, as something that aesthetically I had a hard time picking whether I liked it more than the Masterpiece version that also released around that time. And you know what those two have in common? An actual car carrier mode. Like, Siege can hold 1.5 cars. Kingdom, being that nothing's changed, also gets to hold 1.5 deluxe cars. The CombinerWars trailers can overstuff itself with 4 deluxe vehicles, but more realistically scaled, Siege and Kingdom each hold the similar mini-bot cars comfortably, and CombinerWars comfortably holds 4 of them. Like, at this point, King Siege Magnus is as much a car carrier as Earthrise Optimus, with just cars plunked on top. And for this reason, it's why I look at this trailer more like a garbage scow than I do the car carrier, as it just looks good for one thing and one thing only. So enough of the trailer talk, let's discuss the cabs. With the Core Magnus figure, after using a screwdriver to take off the original cab at the hitch, removing the trailer is as easy as just pulling out of the recessed hole where the trailer pin goes. Siege comes off in 2 places where it connects to the leg, and 1 spot where the red panels tab into the cab, and it all sort of just peels away like a banana. Kingdom Magnus is a little more involved and includes not just peeling the trailer away like a banana, but also taking off the shoulder pads that just sort of hang out clipped onto the back of the truck. So here's the cabs, and the lack of trailer does not do the modern takes any favors. Like, Siege, again, does have the excuse of being alien, and yet the arms just chilling out back here is kinda inexcusable no matter what the reason is attempted to be explained as. But as the RID reference on the front, it's fine, I guess. It just really does not work as an Earth retool. Like, this is just awful. Some may point to the front of the cab and say that looks good for an Earth mode under the circumstances, and even then I'm like, no man, this is awful from front to back. Clearly they were trying to emulate the Earthrise Prime cab, and I don't fault the effort put into the attempt, but even while I see what was trying to be accomplished, it just falls flat. Like, look at all this weird gappage. You get all this conflicting geometry that just doesn't flow aesthetically. Things are soft curves, and then all of a sudden rigid corners, random 3mm ports hanging out here, as well as these random posts that I can't tell what purpose they serve. Thick panel lines are quite evident. The side of the truck is a disgusting mess to look at, while also being disproportionately tall. The back of the truck looks absolutely awful with all the junk hanging out here, with hands to arms to shoulder joints all the way to the toes just sticking up here, not even trying to conceal themselves. Just as an Earth mode truck, this thing suffers just as heavily as Ironhide and Ratchet did being pulled from a figure that never had the intention of being what it is now, which is kinda sad. Ultra Magnus is a cool character design, and it really feels like he was done dirty here. Which finally leads us to Core Magnus. This figure isn't perfect either, but for a truck cab intended to work itself into existing design, I'd say it's done really well for itself. Like, the cab is nice and proportionate, the tires are way too big to be believable, but I get that it's so it can fit in aesthetically with the trailer. The back features a much cleaner truck bed, exhaust stacks that sit properly instead of scrunched up in the middle, and finally features the faux chest we'll see in robot mode. It's inaccurate, but it's not super awful here either. In fact, the very idea of windows back here so you can do a shoulder check to see that you can indeed not see anything past the giant trailer on wheels behind you is somewhat amusing. As for its size, it actually gets closer to being on par with Earthrise Magnus than the Kingdom version gets, weirdly enough. And as an added bonus, the core Magnus can also pull Optimus' trailer with ease as the PEG system is fully compatible. If you ask me, I'd say that's the mark of a true Ultra Magnus. Can he and Optimus swap trailers? If so, that's a good Ultra Magnus. So let's talk accessories then. All of them get some form of the iconic missile launcher. Siege has it stylized, CombinerWars is a double pod system that feels IDW inspired, and Kingdom has a heavy G1 inspired design. All of which look good on their respective vehicles, though all of them being 5mm means you can mix and match and put them wherever you feel like they fit best if you have multiple copies. Other accessories include respective guns their figures came with, and again, 5mm port system, meaning you can fit them anywhere you want so long as there's a port, but we'll get to them later. As for size comparison, Kingdom Prime, Kingdom Sideswipe, Earthrise Prowl, Earthrise Ratchet, Earthrise Trailbreaker, Kingdom Warpath, Kingdom Tracks, Kingdom Wheeljack, and Earthrise Runamuck. And now the real scale question. What's the actual scale? Well, given the disproportionate nature of Kingdom, there's really two answers. Width-wise, it comes out to about 149, as does King Rise Optimus, in which the height of this guy is 6 foot 1.5 inches. Basically, it's ever so slightly smaller than O scale if you're in the US. But if we're talking the height of the cab, that would place Kingdom Magnus at 143, along the likes of Fans Project Dead End as the Ferrari FXX, my 6-foot scale print, or the Studio Series 38 Marvin Optimus. So if you're in the UK or France, this is O scale for you. As for the core Magnus scale, he is substantially more proportionate and as such comes out to 148, which is US O scale and shares that class alongside G1 Optimus. So these are the vehicle modes for the three modern Magni. Truth be told, none of them are perfect. If you're looking for a purely G1 take of the figure, then all of them miss the mark. That being said though, the Siege one doesn't feel like it's aiming for that, and I personally feel that discounting the figure because of this does the figure a serious disservice. Siege Magnus, strictly on a vehicular basis, carries out what it intends to be, a Cybertronian take on the figure with a splash of unrelated series homage. For that, it's pretty cool. The Kingdom retool, however, is just such an insult. The cab looks awful, the trailer is pretending to be something it's not, and all of its faults I find myself having a harder time forgiving because it doesn't have the logic of being alien behind it. It's just not an Earth mode as much as it's trying to shoehorn itself into it. I will give it this though. The compromise to these shortcomings, however, is that this is a leader class price point. Which brings us to CombinerWars Magnus. This feels like a proper G1 Ultra Magnus, especially with a core Magnus cab replacement. The sacrifice to get this though was the cost of Commander class pricing, as the trailer with its included cab is leader price point and the core Magnus figure is Voyager priced. Combining these two makes this roughly the equivalent of a Commander class Ultra Magnus. So yeah, of course this feels a little better. It has a bit more of the combined budget poured into it, even though that budget is spread out between two companies. I'm not about to pretend like this isn't the case. That being said though, if one day we end up getting a Commander class Ultra Magnus from Hasbro, designed from the ground up that felt as good, if not better than Combiner's Ultra Magnus, you can bet your bottom dollar I will definitely be first in line to pre-order one of those.
The Transformers will return after these messages.
This video is sponsored by the white noise your car makes when you don't turn it off all the way.
We now return to the Transformers.
Alrighty then, let's get to transforming the cabs. Hasbro versions start by having their entire trailer fall to pieces and clearing all of that junk out of the way. Next, you pull the legs down, unfold the heels, pull the shoulders out halfway, rotate the cabs, pull the cabs forward like you have access to the engine bay, and pull out the heads. Then close up the shoulders, locking it all into place. Slide the back bumper up, then push the chest into the back, locking it all together. It is by far one of the simplest transformations on what is essentially a Voyager figure, in no small part thanks to the cab that hid basically nothing. As for the core Magnus, transformation starts by moving this little flap backwards, folding the feet up, opening the flaps on the undercarriage and accordioning out the legs, then closing up the flaps. Untab the cab from the chassis, then rotate it around while simultaneously moving it back so the roof slots into the waist. Untab the bumper and swing it all down, then rotate the arms down. Pull the forearms and the hands down and rotate them forward. Finally, rotate the shoulders inward until the wheels point out, and you're done. Cab mode. And, I don't know. Again, this is another one of those cases where I feel like none of them quite get it right. Like, for reference, we're aiming for this, and the only way we can even come close is by mistransforming Optimus to give him the dad bod. And even then, this just highlights the Hasbro Corebot's thighs look like he just binged on the Krabby Patty storeroom.
It'll go right to your thighs, and then you blow up.
One thing I'll absolutely give Hasbro credit here for, though, is the head sculpt on the Corebots. Like, dang, this Corebot has a better Optimus Prime head than Optimus Prime himself. Which leads me to wonder why exactly this head sculpt wasn't reused when it came time to make the Earthrise version. The white Magnus head sculpt just looks so clean, it's awesome. Which is a lot more than I can say for the core Magnus. While it doesn't look bad per se, it definitely does look a little more bug-eyed than it should and a little more round than I'd like. But yeah, points to Hasbro for making the absolute best Prime head they've ever done before and then subsequently giving it to the figure that spends all of its time storing it inside the chest of a core bot. It's not all doom and gloom though. It does have a screw at the back of the head which allows for disassembly, and surprisingly the ball joint size is identical between Magnus and any version of Prime in the War for Cybertron trilogy, so if you have any sort of painting skills, you can absolutely attempt to tear down or repaint your core Magnus head into the proper Optimus face if this is the sculpt you prefer like I do. I will point out, however, that the slight remolding of the way it attaches to the neck would limit it on an Optimus, so be wary of that if you're planning the swap. Anyway, as for other differences between the core Magnus and Hasbro Magnus figures. The Perfect Effect mold is a much more athletic-looking chest, similar in nature to the Earthrise stature. This is, however, accomplished by having the chest made up entirely of the back of the cab, and as such, this ends up being a faux chest with the exhaust stacks hanging out here, making that all the more evident. Even so, I'll take this over the dad bod that the Hasbro variant is rocking here. Both versions include some of the front of the cab resting at the back of the figure, and neither one really looks better than the other for it. I guess points to Hasbro, though, for it not being fake, but it still doesn't look any good. That being said, though, by spinning around the cab during transformation a certain way, you can take the bumper clean off and store it somewhere, making for a really clean back that actually works really well on both figures. And as you'll see later, even helps with articulation on the full package, so if you can tolerate the parts forming, that's definitely an option, and a cleaner looking one at that. Finally, we come to the legs, and this is one area I think the Hasbro version pulls off pretty well as the tires are proportionately smaller on the sides, and the front features a healthy dose of shin venting, something the core Magnus omits for some reason, unless you count that as your vents. Like all in all, as generally nicer of a bot mode some of the areas of the Hasbro version are, I really am impressed with what Perfect Effect pulled off. Simply for the sake that they made a roughly equally sized figure that came out of a significantly smaller truck that also retains functionality of an included cab that still has a trailer pivot, and needs to transform very counterintuitively to the way an Optimus Prime core bot would need to move, and that's exceedingly impressive. As for articulation, on the Hasbro offering, the head moves up and down and rotates on a ball joint. Arm moves 360 degrees with an interior shoulder joint for outward movement. Bicep swivel, 90-degree elbow, and rotating hand. Waist rotates 360 degrees, which is great if you're looking to remove yourself a bumper. Thighs go all the way out, and all the way forward and backward on the siege. The remolded side steps of the Kingdom, however, limit the thigh range to one click backwards. Knees go 90 degrees, and the ankles rotate inwards a little bit. As for the Perfect Effect figure, it also gets full rotation on a ball joint with superb amounts of tilting action. Arms rotate 360 degrees, but unfortunately go outwards on a joint located inside the chest versus the shoulder. Bicep rotation and elbow bend. Due to transformation, a wrist bend exists in the upward direction, as well as wrist rotation from the removable hands. Waist swivels 360, legs go forward and backward all the way, as well as outward all the way, with a thigh swivel in there to boot. Knees bend 110 degrees. Toes both rotate for considerable ankle tilt and go forward if need be. Like, just the ankle tilt alone is leagues better than Hasbro's core bot, and the proportional legs mean it has a far easier time slipping into the superhero landing pose than Hasbro's attempt as well. That being said, the arms are a bit better on the Hasbro product, making for a little more of a proportional outing. As for accessories, Siege comes with 3 rifles and shoulder launchers, Kingdom with 1 rifle, and Core Magnus with an Optimus Prime blaster, a replaceable trailer chest piece, and replaceable hands of all things. Most of the accessories shown here are for the full package, but let's cover what isn't. I'm not sure what the significance of these black blasters Siege comes with, but they exist and they look kinda derpy here. I sort of feel like these are more intended for the full package, but again, I don't know the reference if there is one. Kingdom's accessories are entirely for his trailer package, and Core Magnus fittingly gets the Prime Rifle, which looks really nice. The replaceable hands are splayed out as if to yell out in agony over the occurrence of a disaster, or flipped over to hold the gun awkwardly in a two-handed pose. So those are the core Magnus bots. Again, none of them I feel quite hit the mark of being good. I'm generally unimpressed by the Hasbro versions, as they just feel dumpy with Krabby Patty thighs and big old guts, none of which evoke a white prime to me. And on the other hand, the Perfect Effect version is extensively impressive for what it has to do, but what it has to do has left it with a few aesthetic compromises here and there. That being said, I am impressed that it was able to even do this at all.
The Transformers will return after these messages.
Did you know? This ad space is for rent. If you want to sponsor your video and advertise your channel, the prices are here and they've been worked out based on view count, reach, and how often things happen based on CPM and a whole bunch of good stuff that Anthony Haslage figured out for me that I'm just terrible at. But yeah, here's the prices. If you want to sponsor a video and advertise your channel, pending approval of course by me, because I do have standards, then you can absolutely do so. In the meantime, this video is still sponsored by the white noise your car makes when you leave it on for too long. Thanks!
We now return to the Transformers.
Anyway, White Prime is by no means the main attraction to buying this set, so let's move on to why everyone buys an Ultra Magnus, the relationship he has with his trailer. On the Hasbro version, start by returning the head and the heels if you have them open, make sure the bumper is in the down position, and finally open up the crotch plate and flip it around to make the Ultra Magnus color show up. This is the only Ultra Magnus part of the core Prime actually carries on him at all times. On the trailer, peel open the side walls. On the Siege, remove the shoulder stacks from the back of the trailer and separate. On the Kingdom, do the same step but pull it off the cab. On all of them, flip up the gray piece that only serves to hold it together in alt mode. Back of the trailer, separate the legs and remove the trailer roof entirely. Take the entire wall of the trailer and fold it up like a fitted sheet and wrap it around the leg. Remove the arm panels from the ports on the underside of the roof, then fold at the back, fold under the front, and get the whole piece ready for installation. Open up the arm panels to get them ready. And there you go, the entire trailer disassembled and ready for transformation. At the chest, put the new chest piece on top and then fold the front down until it pegs into these holes. On the back, you'll be clipping into the rail that holds the bumper, thus why you need to have it in the down position. Slot the cuff into the forearm and close the door on top of it. Pop the shoulder stack on until it clicks. Finally, slot the foot in until it clicks. And that's basically it. Feel free to mix and match what's installed if you feel like having a half-naked Magnus run around the base. The Perfect Effect mold, on the other hand, is easiest to explain if you start from vehicle mode. From there, you pull the arms apart like you're about to go into the next robot. From there, you open up the windows and pull open the second head compartment. This uses the original CombinerWars head attached to an included bracket. Then you close it all back up. From there, detach and rotate around the legs, and then you're basically just installing it like normal, in which the trailer transforms into the main body, the cab sits in what used to be the front of the trailer, the legs wrap around to the back, and the new chest cover comes up and pegs in. And here you got your Ultra Magnus bots, and what a journey it took to get here. And what we're left with is 2.5 robots, one of which people seem to take great issue over for some reason, and the other 1.5 gets praised head over heels for. So, let's explore, starting with Siege and Kingdom Ultra Magnus. I genuinely despise this figure. If you like this look, then you are well within your right, and I would not even dream of telling you that you're wrong for liking it or anything, and you can continue liking it all you want. This is just not for me. Like the core bot I was saying earlier with the thighs and the dad bod were disproportionately thick compared to the rest of the bot going on, now we have the opposite problem where all the extra bulk has helped to fill up the size of the chest and thighs, at the cost of making the shins and arms feel simultaneously chubby and stumpy. That's my main gripe as to why I never adopted this figure as my definitive Ultra Magnus, but of course there is more I take issue with. For instance, all that work to have back tires that had clearance in trailer mode has left the robot with his over-exaggerated A-stands if you want flat feet, and there is not a thing you can do about it. If you do want to make him stand up straight, however, nothing's really going to stop you. It's just that he's got a brand new pair of roller skates and you've got a brand new key. Anyway, beyond that, the back of the figure looks nice enough, with or without the back bumper, though I really do recommend removing it. But if you don't, it does make for a nice solid silhouette. The chests are stylized for the respective modes. Both look like Ultra Magnus undeniably, but the Kingdom one has been simplified and taken to a faithful G1 aesthetic while still retaining some detail. I'm going to admit I really like what they've done here. The shoulder stacks in the Kingdom one have been thickened and shortened that do give it a more screen-accurate, faithful look as opposed to the alien-looking Siege one. Both head sculpts are really well done. I like the detail of the Siege, and I like the accuracy of the Kingdom one. I've heard issue taken with the eyes and how they're done on Siege. However, it's the exact same eyes used for Kingdom, believe it or not. The difference is a separate piece of clear plastic for his aviators that was added in front of the face and is part of the construction of the head, as shown off by dismantling both heads and comparing them. I think this is kinda cool. I can only imagine it was more or less the same design on the computer, just cut up differently to assemble in a slightly different way, just so light piping and shades could be added to the face. Anyway, as for the Hasbros, they do have good points to them. Like, it does feel like effort was put into these figures, and I absolutely do see the effort. I just really don't like what that effort has given us. So what does that leave me? Commander Class third-party Ultra Magnus in its G1 toy-accurate baby blue. Right off the bat, the head is incredibly similar in design to its Kingdom counterpart, and I quite like the design. The metallic sky blue paint on these really makes the aviators pop. I love the shoulder towers. Like, if you've been watching my stuff long enough, you know that I love when a figure feels like it's coming from its vehicle mode without that vehicle mode becoming a burden. Like, there's a very fine balance to it, and I can't get enough of these shoulder towers. They feel like the upper rack of a trailer without being in the way, as opposed to all the shrinking I feel like the Kingdom does to feel slavishly accurate. The chest is heavily stylized still, though the third-party change does feel a little closer to an on-screen inspiration than the IDW one he came with, and I quite like the change. Doesn't feel ridiculously out of place here, but still feels a little less comic-inspired. The silhouette feels just as chunky, but also feels more spread out over his height. The legs feel functional with giant clompy shoes as opposed to giant bricks of what is essentially the majority of a trailer compressed into a leg. Because it was. The feet aren't perfect, mind you, as sadly they are forward biased, and as such leave the bulk of the figure supported by this tiny little pin here. As such, he's not exactly the most stable bot at times, and I wish this could be solved somehow. In short, while yes, there is definitely some comic influence to this design, and I know that turns some people off, CombinerWars just feels like Ultra Magnus, just in the way the thing carries itself, and that goes with or without the core upgrade. I find this kind of ironic, all things considered. The figure meant to represent a small guy running around in an Ultra Magnus facsimile to keep the legend alive feels more like a proper Ultra Magnus than the literal attempt to make him an updated G1 take that feels like an overweight truck cosplaying as a leader class figure. Weird stuff, man. Accessories. All of them come with a pantheon of junk. Of course, all of that includes the respective shoulder cannons. However, if the IDW dual pods aren't doing it for you, printers exist in which I've been passively trying to design a replacement. Or you can just pilfer one of them from the Siege or Kingdom if you have either of them. It's all 5mm, it's all cross-compatible. Siege and Kingdom both come with silver blasters meant to invoke the feeling of the original Magnus blaster, and Siege comes with his bolt-on side pistols, which again, I don't know the reference here. CombinerWars Magnus comes with two weapons, neither of which are like the other. One feels semi-auto and the other is a gun of some sort. I don't know my guns, I'm sorry. All of this combines together to give him a hammer though, so if you're into the Magnus hammer concept, then this one's for you. Mind you, he can only hold it in one location on the handle, so let's give him a better hammer and call him King Me. Or Magnus, Truck of Thunder. I don't know, there's lots of cooler hammers Magnus can wield. Could even give it to Kingdom if you really wanted to. I don't know if it looks as cool. As for articulation, nothing's really changed from the CombinerWars version, so if you want a more detailed look into it, check out my 6-year-old video on the subject. Otherwise, here's the highlights. The new joint on the head gives the neck a new up and down movement. Further down if you allow the head to use the transformation joint, and now you get full rotation of the head instead of the limited left and right. There's no 5mm ports on the hands, but they open, which is always cool. No waist rotation, but the legs can go all the way forward and a little bit backward. Leg proportions that make kneeling look fantastic. And finally, the feet are really hindered with their lack of movement, being on one pin and no rocker tilt. Them's the highlights. The Hasbros, on the other hand, given they're bits of trailer welded to a core figure, doesn't have much that makes them much different than what's been covered. Head is on a ball joint for the most embarrassing amount of tilt in any direction, and you get full spin. Ankle tilt is significantly better than the core prime's range, discounting the fact that you're not allowed to stand straight up. And that's it. Head and ankles. Everything else utilizes hardware of the core prime. Basically, if the white prime can hit it, the full package deal can hit it too, with some slight exceptions. That being the back bumper now gets in the way of the legs utilizing their backward movement. So, good luck trying to animate this thing walking, which is a chore unto itself with that wide A stance. Even with the bumper gone, you don't get much, which is disappointing, but not surprising. Knowledge of strapping giant chunks of armor to a base figure and having it hinder articulated range is not news. It isn't even news for an Ultra Magnus because this has been done before. Older collectors may remember vividly when Fans Project made a detachable trailer to clip onto the Classics Ultra Magnus mold, and it worked. It wasn't a car carrier either, but it did the job back when Chugline was in its infancy. A good many of us praised it for giving us an Ultra Magnus to have on our shelf when Hasbro would only give us the white truck. But man, did it ever limit the articulation, especially in the arms. Like, there was not a thing you could do with it animation-wise except wave the arms around awkwardly, and here's this figure, 14 years later, not having the shortcomings of being a product of a company trying to work around an official product, but by design from the official source from the ground up. And look at how much he suffers for it. This was the best superhero landing I could pull off with the supposed best Ultra Magnus on the market for mainline scale, according to my commenters, versus the 6-year-old contender. One is very comfortable in this position. The other is struggling to accomplish the same thing. In the hours it took to make this video and the months of owning the Siege figure, I just don't get the hype for this thing. For size comparison, Leader Class Grimlock, Commander Class Rodimus, Voyager Class Hot Rod, Voyager Springer, Deluxe Cup, Leader Class Optimus, Deluxe Blur, Takara Legends RC, Deluxe Lifeline, Deluxe Bumblebee, Deluxe Cliffjumper, and Siege Core Magnus. Here's your new bots from the beginning of the movie with CombinerWars, and here's your new bots from the end of the movie with CombinerWars. Here's the same group with Kingdom before, and here's your same group with Kingdom after. Here's Kingdom with Galvatron, Cyclonus, Scourge, and being pulled apart by sweeps. And here's CombinerWars with that same group and Rodimus, but not getting pulled apart. Not gonna lie, whether or not this is supposed to be how big he is in the animation, I really like it. It feels like how a truck and trailer combo is supposed to look compared to other cars. Finally, here's Kingdom with the scaled stuff from earlier. Here's cab width scale and cab height scale. And here's CombinerWars scale Power the Prime Wind Charger, which scales at 150, and the guy in this shot is again 6 foot 1.5 inches. So that was the modern mainline Magni. While I don't like the design, I feel as though Siege sorta gets a pass in the sense of the whole alien pre-Earth theme going on. That doesn't make him good, it just makes it excusable. Which leaves it a race between these two as a pick for your Earth mode Magnus. And what you want is really up to you. If you like the colors and the simplified design of Kingdom as a G1 Magnus, well, there you go. I'm not about to change your mind. After all the resources Hasbro has invested into making this Magnus, I really don't see them updating this figure anytime soon, but man, I hope I'm wrong. Clearly, I have spent the money it takes to have a Commander Class Ultra Magnus, and for that money I have a CombinerWars trailer which absolutely could use an update, especially in the feet, but it has a third-party core Magnus on board, and the proportions are still a ton of fun to mess about with. But that being said, I would absolutely be on board with the Commander Class Ultra Magnus after seeing what can be done with Rodimus. Imagine what we could get with the budget poured into this character. We could easily see a smaller contender for Masterpiece with the extensive range and articulation. However, knowing that Motormaster is the next Commander class, I highly doubt that's going to become a reality anytime soon. So again, that leaves you with a derpy but kinda nice looking cosplaying Kingdom Class Ultra Magnus, or the really nicely proportioned but not quite G1 take CombinerWars version. Choice for your shelf is yours, but until Commander Class happens, I'm gonna stick with CombinerWars. This has been the Lazy Eyebrow. Hey, we made it to the end of the video. The video that was supposed to be a diet review. The video that was supposed to be 10 minutes long. And here we are, almost 40 minutes later, talking about 3 Ultra Magnuses when I was supposed to talk about Hot Rod for review 131. But, not Hot Rod, this is Rodimus Prime. For 132, we are for sure going to talk about Rodimus Prime. In the meantime, I might do the other option, which was RC for a diet review, because I do need to make a diet review. I guess I don't need to, but for my own arbitrary rule set, I need to make a video. Shout out to Firehawk Games, he knows what he did. I might do more patron shoutouts in the future, but yeah, good job Firehawk, you called it. Yeah, so where we're going from here? Rodimus, I've already said that. This is the blue background I've made. I think we're going to stick with it now. It's a lot better than trying to stand in front of a wall that has a whole bunch of junk on it, especially since the projector screen's been taken down because it broke. So Yeah, I usually use this area to announce things that have been going on, and I feel like I'm rambling now, which I probably am, padding out the already way too long episode. So yeah, thank you all for watching. We'll see you in the next review, where again we will talk about Rodimus Prime for sure this time. And yeah, we'll see you then. This has been the Lazy Eyebrow.